welcome to WT History. In this series, we list all the major events that happened in the world in a year, starting from 1776 to 2024. On January 22nd and January 24th, in the thick woods of northern Alabama, U.S. forces under General Andrew Jackson clashed with the Red Sticks, a faction of the Creek Indians allied with the British. Though the fighting was intense, Jackson's forces managed to repel the attacks, securing an important victory. Just days later, on January 27th, another major battle took place at Calaby Creek. General John Floyd led U.S. troops against the Red Sticks, once again securing a victory in Alabama and weakening the Creek resistance. As winter waned, the war moved north. On March 4th, an American raiding party launched an attack at Longwoods, engaging British regulars, militia, and allied Native American forces. Despite being outnumbered, the Americans claimed victory, proving their resilience in Canadian territory. March 27th marked a turning point in the Creek War. General Andrew Jackson led a decisive assault at Horseshoe Bend in northern Alabama. His forces crushed the Red Sticks, effectively ending their resistance. This victory cemented Jackson's reputation as a military leader. The war was not just fought on land. On March 28th, two British Royal Navy ships engaged the USS Essex and its sister ship off the coast of Valparaiso, Chile. The outmatched Americans were forced to surrender, proving British naval dominance on the high seas. Back in North America, on March 30th, American forces attacked a British garrison at La Colle Mills in Canada. Despite their efforts, the British defenders repelled the attack, forcing the Americans to retreat. On April 28th, the tide turned at sea when the USS Peacock captured the British brig HMS Ayr. This victory not only boosted American morale, but also secured much-needed gold for the war effort. On May 6th, the British struck back, attacking Fort Ontario in Oswego, New York. Their superior firepower forced American defenders to retreat, handing the British control of the strategic outpost. From May 14th to May 16th, American forces raided Port Dover in Canada, destroying property in retaliation for British attacks. On May 29th and May 30th, U.S. troops successfully ambushed and captured British Marines and sailors at Big Sandy Creek, disrupting enemy plans in the Great Lakes region. The high seas saw another American victory on June 28th, when the USS Wasp sank the British sloop HMS Reindeer after a fierce naval battle. On July 3rd, American troops under Major General Jacob Brown captured Fort Erie, marking a significant gain in Upper Canada. Days later, on July 5th, Brown's forces defeated the British at Chippewa, Ontario, showcasing the growing strength of the U.S. Army. July 19th to 20th, the Siege of Prairie du Chien. British troops and their Native American allies besieged and captured this strategic frontier settlement, giving Britain control over the upper Mississippi River. On July 19th, another major event took place, the Battle of Rock Island Rapids. British allied tribes ambushed an American expedition in Illinois, dealing them a significant defeat. 3 days later, on July 22nd, the Treaty of Greenville was signed between the U.S. government and Native American tribes. July 25th, the Battle of Lundy's Lane, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Near Niagara Falls, British and Canadian forces under General Ryle clashed with American troops led by Jacob Brown. The brutal all-night battle raged until dawn, forcing the Americans to retreat to Fort Erie. On August 4th, the British scored another victory at the Battle of Mackinac Island. American forces attempted to retake the island, but were ultimately defeated, further solidifying British control of the Great Lakes region. Meanwhile, the British began the siege of Fort Erie, a crucial American stronghold. The siege would last for weeks, becoming a pivotal confrontation in the war. August 9th marked the end of the Creek War with the signing of the Treaty of Fort Jackson. This agreement forced the Creek Nation to cede vast amounts of land to the United States. Between August 13th and September 6th, the war continued on Lake Huron, where British forces emerged victorious in a series of naval engagements. August 24th, the burning of Washington. After defeating American forces at the Battle of Bladensburg, British troops entered Washington, D.C. and set fire to key buildings, including the Capitol and the Presidential Mansion. This act was one of the most devastating moments in American history. August 31st, the Battle of Cox Field. In a rare American victory, militia forces successfully repelled a British landing, proving that local resistance was still strong. September 1st, the USS Wasp sunk HMS Avon in a dramatic naval confrontation, demonstrating American naval resilience. September 2nd, The raid on Alexandria ended in a British victory, further humiliating American forces in their own territory. On September 3rd, the British secured another win at the Battle of Hampton, maintaining their dominance along the coast. September 11th, the Battle of Lake Champlain. In one of the most decisive victories of the war, the American Navy under Thomas MacDonough defeated a British squadron. This forced British land forces to retreat back into Canada, marking a turning point in the war. September 12th, the Battle of North Point. American forces managed to halt the British advance toward Baltimore, setting the stage for the defense of Fort McHenry. September 13th, the bombardment of Fort McHenry. British warships launched a relentless attack on the fort, but the American defenders held strong. This battle inspired Francis Scott Key to write a poem that would later become the U.S. national anthem, The Star-Spangled Banner. September 21st, the British siege of Fort Erie ended in failure, forcing them to retreat and solidifying American control of the fort. September 27th, the Battle of Fayal saw American forces claim victory over the British in another naval engagement. October 19th, the Battle of Cook's Mills. American forces achieved another victory in Upper Canada, further weakening British control in the region. November 7th, Andrew Jackson led American forces to seize Pensacola, Florida. This action was a significant step toward U.S. expansion in the South. December 15th, the Hartford Convention. Federalist Party members gathered to discuss their grievances against the war, revealing deep divisions within the United States. Finally, on December 24th, the Treaty of Ghent was signed, officially ending the War of 1812. Though news of the treaty had yet to reach America, this agreement restored pre-war borders and paved the way for peace. On January 3rd, after 10 days of relentless bombardment, the French garrison at Cattaro surrendered to the British, marking another setback for Napoleon's forces. Meanwhile, the Allied armies surrounded the French stronghold of Metz, laying siege to this critical fortress. Just days later, on January 11th, Prussian forces under Friedrich Wilhelm Freiherr von Bülow engaged the French at Hoogstraten. The battle ended in an Allied victory, further weakening Napoleon's grip in the region. On January 14th, the Allied forces laid siege to the strategic city of Antwerp, a vital French-controlled port. The siege would last for months, putting immense pressure on Napoleon's forces. As the conflict spread on January 19th, the Allies launched a siege on the French-held town of Ragusa, further tightening their grip on Napoleon's European defenses. On January 24th, Austrian and Württemberger forces clashed with Napoleon's Imperial Guard at Bar-sur-Aube. The battle was fierce but inconclusive, as both sides suffered heavy losses. After weeks of resistance, on January 27th, the French garrison at Ragusa surrendered to the British and Austrians. On January 29th, Napoleon personally led his forces into battle at Brienne against Prussian General von Blücher. The French emerged victorious, proving that Napoleon was still a formidable force on the battlefield. However, Napoleon's momentum was short-lived. On February 1st, at La Rothière, Blücher's Allied army struck back, dealing Napoleon a devastating defeat and forcing the French into retreat. Determined to regain lost ground, French forces under Joseph Lagrange launched an attack at Lesmont on February 2nd, successfully pushing the Allied troops. The war extended to Italy, where on February 8th, French and Italian forces led Viceroy Eugène de Beauharnais clashed with the Austrians at the Mincio River. The battle ended in a draw, with heavy losses on both sides. On February 10th, the War of the Sixth Coalition saw a dramatic turn with the Battle of Champaubert. Napoleon led the French army to a decisive victory, crushing a small Russian corps under Zakhar Dmitrievich Olsufiev. This battle marked the beginning of the legendary 6 Days Campaign. The next day, on February 11th, Napoleon continued his unstoppable march at the Battle of Montmirail. He defeated combined Russian and Prussian forces led by Fabian Gottlieb von der Osten-Sacken and Ludwig Yorck von Wartenberg. On February 12th, Napoleon once again emerged victorious at the Battle of Château-Thierry. Then on February 14th, Napoleon struck again at the Battle of Vauchamps, defeating General von Blücher in what would be the last major engagement of the campaign. But the French victories were short-lived. On February 15th, at the Battle of Garris, British-led Allied forces under the Duke of Wellington defeated French troops commanded by Jean-Isidore Harispe. On February 17th, Napoleon crushed a Russian division at the Battle of Mormant. The very next day, on February 18th, he defeated Austrian forces at the Battle of Montereau, proving his tactical brilliance yet again. However, on February 27th, the French suffered losses on two fronts. In the Battle of Bar-sur-Aube, the Allies under the Prince of Schwarzenberg defeated the French under Jacques MacDonald. Meanwhile, at the Battle of Orthez, the Duke of Wellington's forces defeated Jean de Dieu-Soult's army, securing another major victory. On February 28th, at the Battle of Gaya-Trems, two French corps under Auguste Marmont and Édouard Mortier managed to defeat Prusso-Russian forces. On March 1st, the Austrian Army of the South defeated the French Army of the Rhone at the Battle of Saint-Julien. On March 3rd, at the Battle of Lobressul, Austrian forces under Schwarzenberg once again defeated the French under MacDonald. Then, on March 5th, Napoleon's cavalry triumphed at the Battle of Berry-au-Bac, where they defeated Cossacks led by Ferdinand von Wintzingerode. However, on March 7th, the Battle of Craonne took place. Napoleon defeated combined Russian and Prussian forces under von Blücher and Vorontsov, but at a great cost, as French losses were higher than their opponents. A day later, on March 8th, the British attempted a surprise attack on the French fortress of Bergen-op-Zoom, but the operation failed. On March 9th, the Treaty of Chaumont was signed by the Allied powers, strengthening their alliance against France. Then, on March 10th, at the Battle of Laon, von Blücher finally managed to defeat Napoleon, dealing a heavy blow to the French forces. On March 11th, at the Battle of Mâcon, the Austrian Army of the South once again defeated the French Army of the Rhone. On March 13th, Napoleon bounced back with a victory at the Battle of Reims, defeating a combined Russo-Prussian corps. However, the tide was turning against him. On March 20th, the Battle of Limonest ended with Austrian and Hessian forces defeating the French Army of the Rhone. Then, on March 21st, Napoleon suffered another loss at the Battle of Arcis-sur-Aube, where Allied forces overwhelmed his army. On March 25th, at the Battle of Fère-Champenoise, the Allies led by Schwarzenberg defeated the French under Marmont and Mortier. Napoleon achieved one last victory on March 26th at the Battle of Saint-Dizier, defeating Russian forces under Ferdinand von Wintzingerode. At sea, on March 26th and 27th, British naval forces clashed with the French at the Battle of Joburg, capturing two French frigates. Then, on March 30th, the Battle of Paris began. The Allies launched their final assault on the French capital. The very next day, on March 31st, Paris fell. Coalition troops occupied the city, marking the beginning of the end for Napoleon. On the same day, at the Battle of Courtrai, the French defeated Saxon and Prussian forces, but this victory could not change the outcome of the war. On April 6th, the Napoleonic Wars took a dramatic turn with the Bourbon Restoration. Louis XVIII was invited to reclaim the French throne. On April 10th, at the Battle of Toulouse, the Duke of Wellington secured another major victory. Meanwhile, the Allies lifted the siege of Metz. Then, on April 11th, the Treaty of Fontainebleau was signed. This officially ended the War of the Sixth Coalition, forcing Napoleon to abdicate unconditionally as Emperor of France. On April 12th, the Count of Artois arrived in Paris to act as Lieutenant General of France before the return of his brother, Louis XVIII. On April 14th, at the Battle of Bayonne, the Allies defeated a French counterattack. Between April 18th and 19th, Genoa surrendered to the British Royal Navy. On April 24th, the Convention of Mantua returned the Napoleonic Kingdom of Italy to Austrian control. Then, on April 28th, the Ligurian Republic was briefly revived. On May 2nd, Louis XVIII issued the Declaration of Saint-Ouen, expressing support for representative government. The next day, on May 3rd, the Duke of Provence, the future Louis XVIII, returned to Paris. On May 4th, the sieges of Antwerp and Mainz ended as the French forces surrendered. Then, on May 17th, Austria took control of Monaco from the French. On May 27th, the siege of Hamburg ended with a French surrender. The following day, on May 28th, Barcelona was restored to Spanish Bourbon rule as the French forces withdrew. On May 30th, the First Treaty of Paris was signed, officially setting France's borders back to where they were in 1792 and exiling Napoleon to Elba. On June 4th, Louis XVIII issued the Charter of 1814, a constitution maintaining royal authority. On June 6th, the Allied sovereigns, including Tsar Alexander I of Russia and King Frederick William III of Prussia, visited England. Then, on June 17th, these leaders ratified the peace treaty with France. On June 21st, the 8 Articles of London were signed, uniting the Low Countries under William I of the Netherlands. By July 28th, the revived Ligurian Republic was dissolved. And finally, on November 1st, the Congress of Vienna officially opened, bringing together European leaders to redraw national borders after Napoleon's defeat. On February 1st, Lord Byron's The Corsair took London by storm, selling 10,000 copies in a single day, a publishing sensation that cemented Byron's celebrity status. Just days later, on February 12th, disaster struck as fire consumed London's Custom House, a vital hub of British trade and taxation. The financial world was rocked on February 21st when London's great stock exchange fraud was exposed, shaking public confidence in the markets. By June 12th, Byron had composed one of his most famous poems, She Walks in Beauty, inspired by his cousin. July 7th, literary history was made when Walter Scott's Waverley, the first major historical novel in English, sold out within 2 days of its anonymous publication in Edinburgh. The Industrial Revolution gained steam, literally, on July 25th when George Stephenson successfully tested his first locomotive, Blucher, in England. August 1st saw Britain celebrate the Grand Jubilee, 100 years of Hanoverian succession, the line of kings that had ruled Britain since 1714, with nationwide festivities. A dark chapter ended on August 12th with Britain's last execution under the notorious Black Act, William Potter hanged for cutting down an orchard. On August 13th, the Anglo-Dutch Treaty was signed in London, restoring most Dutch colonial possessions seized by Britain since 1803. However, Britain kept strategic territories like the Cape of Good Hope and South America's Demerara, Essequibo, and Berbice, later British Guiana. In exchange, Britain gave up Banca, near Sumatra, to the Netherlands while gaining Cochin in India. This agreement strengthened Britain's global trade dominance and colonial influence. And finally, on October 17th, the London beer flood took place. A large vat full of porter at Moog's Brewery burst, sending a tidal wave of beer crashing through the streets of London. The flood demolished buildings and tragically killed 8 people. In Mexico on January 5th, Spanish royalists crushed rebel forces at Puruaran, showing the fierce struggle for independence was far from over. A kingdom changed hands on January 14th when Denmark's Frederick VI surrendered Norway to Sweden in the Treaty of Kiel, ending 434 years of Danish rule. Argentina took another step towards self-rule on January 31st when Gervasio Antonio de Posadas became its first supreme director. Tragedy struck the Philippines on February 1st when Mount Mayon erupted violently, burying over 1,200 people and destroying the iconic Kagsawa Church. Norway boldly proclaimed independence on February 11th, defying both Denmark and Sweden in a dramatic break from the Kalmar Union's legacy. In Venezuela on February 12th, rebel forces scored a crucial victory at La Victoria against Spanish royalists, keeping independence hopes alive. Chilean rebels suffered defeat on March 3rd at Talca as Spanish royalists pushed back against the independence movement. Argentine forces turned the tide from March 10th to 15th, defeating Spanish royalists at Martin Garcia in a key naval battle. Chilean rebels rebounded on March 19th with victory at El Kilo, proving their struggle was far from over. Another Chilean rebel triumph came on March 20th at Membrillar as the independence forces gained momentum. But Spanish royalists struck back on March 29th, crushing Chilean rebels at Cancha Rayada in a brutal defeat. In Amsterdam on March 25th, the foundations of modern Dutch finance were laid with the establishment of De Nederlandse Bank. Norway rebuilt its military might on April 12th, re-establishing its Royal Navy to defend its fragile independence. A temporary peace came to Chile on May 3rd with the Treaty of Lurkay, though tensions between royalists and patriots remained. Spain took a dark turn on May 4th when King Ferdinand VII abolished the liberal 1812 Constitution, restoring absolute monarchy. A historic day for Norway on May 17th, as its constitution was signed and Christian Frederick was elected king, marking Europe's first democratic constitution. Meanwhile, in Uruguay on May 17th, Argentine forces scored a naval victory at Buceo, burning 5 Spanish ships. Simón Bolívar secured his legend on May 28th, crushing Spanish forces at Carabobo in a pivotal Venezuelan victory. The Spanish Empire suffered another blow on June 20th when Montevideo, last stronghold of the Rio de la Plata viceroyalty, fell to rebel forces. War erupted in Scandinavia on July 26th as Sweden invaded Norway to enforce the Kiel Treaty terms. Swedish forces captured Valor on July 29th in their first major victory of the war. Norway struck back on August 2nd with victory at Lier, proving they wouldn't surrender easily. Sweden regained momentum on August 4th by capturing Fredrikstad in heavy fighting. Norwegian forces prevailed again on August 5th at Matrand in one of the war's bloodiest battles. At Langness on August 9th, Norwegian defenders turned back another Swedish assault. The war's climax came on August 14th. Sweden won at Kilberg Bridge, but both sides signed the Convention of Moss, creating a Swedish-Norwegian union while preserving Norway's constitution. Sweden's Charles III became Norway's Charles II on November 4th, uniting the crowns but not the nations. Disaster struck Bavaria on July 30th when the Great Fire of Tirschenreuth destroyed 907 buildings. Chile's civil war intensified on August 26th when José Miguel Carrera's forces triumphed at Las Tres Acequias. In the Balkans on September 27th, Haji Prodin launched a rebellion against Ottoman rule, the first of many Serbian uprisings. On November 1st, Francis Rawdon Hastings, the Governor-General of India, declared war on Himalayan Kingdom of Nepal, marking the beginning of the brutal Anglo-Nepalese War. On December 25th, Samuel Marsden of the Church Missionary Society preached the first sermon in New Zealand, probably in the Maori language at Oihi. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.